Hello, my name is Dr. Sharoni Little, and I am excited to be joining you all at the conference for NASSH. The title of my presentation today is Executive Excellence, Women Leaders Transforming the Owner's Box and the C-Suite in Global Sports. This topic is very dear to me as I am vitally interested in leadership across various industries. I am a lifelong sports fanatic, and most importantly, really understand the intersection of leadership and gender, as well as power dynamics that intersect and are involved when we begin to look at major league sports, both in the United States and around the world, and looking at not only from a position of ownership, but also from the executive C-suite. I begin this presentation with a nod to Pat Summitt, who was the former coach of the Tennessee Lady Vols basketball team for many, many years. And the reason that I do so is because I personally feel that she exemplified a lot of what has motivated me to do this research, not only around leadership in various capacities, but as a woman who transcended many of the spaces, especially within global sports, that some may have felt that she could never ascend to or participate in. And so I do this in her memory. So a quick overview. Global sports really is a highly visible and diverse industry requiring strategic, curious, authentic, informed, and dynamic leaders. And what this presentation is intended to do is to demonstrate through example, through narrative, and through various roles, executive leadership across global sports context, including, as I stated, ownership, league governance, executive leadership in many facets across the C-suite, and even enterprise building. And those featured are very distinct, strong, and transformative leaders and exemplars in global sports. Before I begin delving into those who are really the focus of my research and for this presentation, I wanted us to interrogate really what do we mean when we say leadership? And there's so many different ways in which to think about, talk about, and envision leadership. Some look at it as a series of attributes or an accumulation of traits. So, or what do you do? What are the things that are part of a leadership enactment, whether it be guidance, solutions, are there goals involved, motivation? Sometimes when we speak about leadership, we think about qualities around self-awareness or credibility, how one thinks about equity, authenticity, one's presence. Another way in which leadership is discussed really is what are the outcomes? What does it look like on behalf of those who are the recipients, or is it the enactment of leadership? Again, ways in which to think about it, whether it's empowerment or inspiration or leading or sharing a vision, giving direction. There are also ways to think about leadership from a values-driven or influential or collaborative, again, thinking about what is the source or the desired outcome, and then a mixture of what are those attributes, values, and traits. Oftentimes, when leadership is discussed, it's also in the context of styles. Common leadership styles have included this notion of visionary, a person who is inspirational, who casts a vision for the future, something that is aspirational. Servant leadership is definitely one of the styles, or in a minute, we're going to talk about theories of leadership that speak about not being self-centered, but on behalf of others. Transactional, where it's really about accomplishing a particular task or outcome. This notion of laissez-faire, kind of hands off and just allow circumstances to evolve, or even bureaucratic, where there's a very clear hierarchy associated with roles, assigned tasks, assigned functions. But again, there is not one sense or definition really when we start delving into leadership research as to what does it mean. A very noted researcher, Peter Drucker, in leadership theory and leadership circles, has defined leadership as a process of social influence, which maximizes the efforts of others toward the achievement of a greater good. So we kind of see again this notion of a little bit of vision, outcomes, some forecasting, some empowerment, ways in which a person can help others get to this notion of a greater good. And then finally, looking at different theories that have been established, created to help understand, especially in the realm of business, how leadership evolves and shows up. So we talked a little bit about servant leadership, authentic leadership, meaning that you're bringing your whole selves to an opportunity, to a role, to an institution or an organization. Power and influence, how individuals either exert their power, create space for power to be shared, how influence plays a role, sometimes more than knowledge or skills or set defined functions. Participatory leadership, where while there might be a semblance of either a hierarchy or a flat organization, there is a way in which to engage all stakeholders. Because when we think about business in particular, all business begins and ends with people. And so as we think about the notion of how does leadership show up, why is it important, how is it important? And in the context of my research, as we look at global sports, and as I said earlier, a very highly visible and very highly scrutinized domain and industry, how does leadership really get analyzed, assessed, viewed? So when I think about leadership, the first and foremost thing that is very important to me is that leadership is not monolithic, neither in context or by individuals. And while, as I just discussed, there may be commonalities and maybe ways in which we can look at the aggregation of leaders to get some insight about ways in which especially effective and dynamic leaders lead. One of the things that I wanted to show through this presentation is that it's vitally important to really go to the centrality of individual leaders, their own narratives, and using their experience as evidence of their leadership. So their actual decision making, the ways in which they achieve their outcomes, the ways in which they even come into roles of leadership, for me, is the driver of my research. And both from a qualitative and a quantitative perspective, ways in which we can then learn, but again, from a focus of understanding that the goal is not to learn to make it a monolithic or one size fits all, or really a narrow perspective, but to gain the learnings and the insight and the strategies and the tools from these exemplars. So, as I said, my focus today on my research is on the broader global sports. And while I will be showing and speaking about leaders from different major leagues, it is not at all exhaustive. And I recognize that there was absolutely no way that I could represent all leagues and all leaders. But I wanted to give some representation, especially to those that are more common oftentimes when discussed global sports, and especially as we look historically at the access and availability of diverse leaders in these spaces. So whether it's the WNBA, the NFL, the LPGA, AUSL, Pro Volleyball Federation, the NBA, the National Women's Soccer League, F1, PGA, NASCAR, USTA, the WTA, and Major League Baseball, again, what we will show is that across these various leagues, women leaders, and I'm talking about their leadership. And yes, I did focus on this demographic of women, but it wasn't because merely they were women that I chose to highlight their leadership. And this goes back to avoiding monoliths or caricatures or limiting representation of what women's leadership should look like in any industry, but especially in global sports, which has historically been associated. And when we look at data, how the numbers reflect who has gotten access to global sports in terms of a leadership opportunity, it has been historically male dominated. So while again, I recognize that I am not mentioning every league, I wanted to start by showing some data associated with those that are more common, such as the NFL, the NBA, the WNBA, Major League Baseball, National Hockey League, and National Women's Soccer League. And so if we start with the NFL in 2022, 41% of the positions in the NFL league office were held by women. And again, as we think about historically male-driven, male-occupied professional sports, this has been somewhat of an area where the argument has been asked or made whether or not women have the capabilities, the context, the experience, the relevance to lead in these professional contexts, right? So we also know that the number of women specifically in football operations has risen several percentages. And while it may still appear low, relatively speaking, there has been growth. And as of 2025, 2026, female leadership in the NFL has reached record highs as we see these trends toward increased participation and leadership among women in these professional leagues. If we look to the NBA, over 20% of NBA team C-suite executives are women, many serving as CEOs or presidents of business or basketball operations, and again, making up roughly 30% of team vice presidents and other C-suite positions, everything from CFO to CMO to COO. It really, really is important that we recognize, again, just like no two leaders are exactly the same, and women leaders in global sports, they are not monoliths. It's imperative to recognize that across the C-suite and across and throughout all aspects of an organization, it's imperative to have diverse voices, to have dynamic leadership, which is responsive and curious and not static. Major League Baseball, similar gains that we're seeing as with other leagues. 14 women have held controlling ownership stakes. And again, that's one of my primary foci for this research and for ongoing research that I'm working on is this notion of the ownership space. One, because it also signals resources and economic access, as well as how one leads at an ownership level, which has many other complexities associated with its function, and how for many years across many major league sports, women were precluded or they had to have some form of male association. whether it be family or spouse. And while we definitely see some of those same trends, there is not this negative connotation because these women have on their own right with their own funding in many cases, but also bringing their business acumen to lead and oftentimes to enhance these organizations. It's imperative that their leadership is studied, identified, heralded, and then looked at so we can say, what are some insights that we can gain or glean from their experiences? The NHL similarly seeing increases in more than 25% of women in senior leadership positions are within the league offices across the C-suite. And as we look at National Women's Soccer League and NASCAR, again, other motorsports, we're seeing some of the same trends and driving valuation, driving revenue, which oftentimes in the business world, especially in sports, is one of those bottom line indicators that people tend to associate with effective leadership. So let's start with the owner's box because I think one, it's very important, as I said, to recognize the trends that are happening with the increase of not only women leading in the executive suite, but in the owner's box. And while I will not be able to speak about everyone shown, I have identified some representative examples to demonstrate the diversity of owners, how they've come about to be in the owner's box, and the ways in which they are navigating this positionality to both enhance, to grow, to change the ways in which the sports industry operates. Another very important reason for me, as you will see with my PowerPoint, is to give visibility. Because oftentimes, even though there has been a historical exclusion in some capacities or dearth of women leaders, it does make a difference to see the breadth of women leaders in these various spaces. And so I wanted to give recognition to historically Helene Hathaway Britton, who was the first female Major League Baseball owner. She was the owner of the St. Louis Cardinals in the early 1900s. As we move forward, you will recognize or may recognize some of these names, and some you may not. And that's again why I want to bring visibility. So Sheila Johnson, who was the founder, co-founder, BET, which was a media network. She is the only woman currently who is the owner of 3 major league teams. Owner in Washington Mystics in the WNBA, Washington Wizards of the NBA, and the Washington Capitals in the NHL. And for many of these women, they have very storied backgrounds. And because of time, I unfortunately cannot go deeper, but in a book project that I'm working on, it has been fascinating to see, as I said, the very diverse journeys and pathways that these women have taken and how their expertise, their individual and their collective expertise and authenticity inform really this suite of leadership strategies and tools. Michelle Kang is the owner of the Washington Spirit of the National Women's Soccer League, as well as 2 additional leagues that are global. And as we begin to look at how these women curated and cultivated their ownership opportunities, she began her career as a management consultant and senior executive at Northrop Grumman. And she really grew their informational technology division around health and would go on to build an organization that focuses on health information to transform U.S. healthcare systems. And then she utilized that both expertise and the treasure from her hard work to then acquire the Washington Spirit, making her the first woman of color to own a National Women's Soccer League team. And so, as we'll see with many of these exemplars, as I've noted, they come from such vast backgrounds and interests, but at the end of the day, they provide us core examples of what sound leadership looks like. And as you delve into their journeys at the crux of sometimes very contentious decision-making situations, growth situations, expansion situations, it really is insightful. Kim Pegula, who is the co-owner and president and CEO of the Buffalo Bills of the NFL, as well as the Buffalo Sabres in the NHL. And she made history as the first female president of both an NFL and NHL franchise, and previously served as the president of CEO of Pegula Sports and Entertainment, where she oversaw all of business operations. And so when you start thinking about those functions and those responsibilities, we always know that it needs, again, this toolkit, right? Not one size fits all, but cultivating a toolkit to be adaptive and responsive to various contexts. Now, I'll go on further and I will list some of these leaders and allow you to look. Charlotte Jones Anderson, who's co-owner and EVP with Dallas Cowboys. We have these three owners who were founders of Angel City Football Club of the National Women's Soccer League. Condoleezza Rice, who is one of the minority owners of the Denver Broncos and the NFL. And we know that she, again, utilized many of her professional and academic skill sets, having served as the 66th United States Secretary of State and then going on to be the National Security Advisor. Again, building these experiences and then using those transferable skills as an owner and leader in professional sports. We see Venus and Serena Williams, who were the first Black women to own an NFL team, owners of the Miami Dolphins in the NFL. We see Carly Irsay Gordon, who is the principal owner and CEO of the Indianapolis Colts, having taken over from her father, and she and her sisters are running this organization and have grown it immensely, as well as giving back to society. So in addition to building on her experiences early on, starting in the ticket office, she grew her leadership through hard work and have now been appointed as CEO and primary owner. She's very much committed to equity and access, and she's created and oversees the Colts Tony Dungy Diversity Coaching Fellowship, as well as the Harriet P. Irsay Fellowship for Women in Football. Melody Hobson, another co-owner of the Denver Broncos, who has a very prominent career and is an American businesswoman who was president and co-CEO of Ariel Investments. She served as the former board chair of Starbucks, making her the first Black woman to chair an S&P 500 company, and chairperson of DreamWorks Animation. Jeannie Buss, former owner of the Los Angeles Lakers for many years, who led, and she was president, and who led the operations of that entity. We have Colleen Craig, who is founder and owner of the Atlanta Vibe and part of the founders of Professional Volleyball Federation, which is a very fast-growing professional league. Craig, who brings, again, a wealth, and as you will begin to see, this is a theme where you see these leaders coming from disparate industries, different experiences, but galvanizing their knowledge, their curiosity, their passion, in many cases, their own experiences as athletes, and transferring those skill sets and transferring those relationships into the ultimate form of leadership, whether it be owners or in the C-suite. So she utilized her education and her roles in healthcare and finance, including being a CFO, a COO, a head of strategy, and really leveraging those experiences, both personally and professionally, to build a suite of knowledge and tools to take on this ownership and leadership. We see Renee Montgomery, who is a co-owner of the Atlanta Dream, Dee Haslam, who is co-owner of the Cleveland Browns, the Milwaukee Bucks, and also Major League Soccer teams. And so another theme that emerges from my research is that you will begin to see many of these owner leaders not just be complacent or necessarily within one realm of global sports, not only recognizing the opportunities economically, but the impact that they can have from this intersection of different global sports industries. We have Denise DeBartola York, who is the principal owner and co-chairwoman of the San Francisco 49ers. Again, an exemplary of where she also expanded into other major league sports by being an owner of Leeds United and the Rangers, which are international soccer teams. And again, throughout her experience, she took on various roles, whether it was executive vice president, vice chairwoman, and then co-chairwoman following her father's passing in 1994. We have Rosalind Brewer, who is one of the minority owners in the Atlanta Falcons of the NFL. And again, a woman who has served major companies. She was the former CEO of Walgreens, the COO of Starbucks, the CEO of Sam's Club, and she became part of the ownership group of the Falcons in 2024. And again, bringing this amalgamation of experiences. We have a very formidable team of founders and owners who purchased and lead Bay Football Club and the National Women's Soccer League. These women themselves, former professional athletes, again, leveraging all aspects of their experiences. Dominique Dawes, another minority owner, former professional athlete of the Atlanta Falcons. Jody Allen, who was owner and chair of the Seattle Seahawks of the NFL, who took ownership and partnered with her brother and is guiding the team. One of the more recent and soon to be owners of a Major League Baseball team, Kwanzaa Jones, she and her partner will now be the co-owners of the San Diego Padres in Major League, and utilizing her diverse experience as an artist, as an investor, as an entrepreneur and philanthropist. They are set to purchase the San Diego Padres for a record $3.9 billion. And so we see, again, on and on, the diversity of owners and individuals who are becoming involved. And so what I will do is share very quickly some different exemplars of owners, women owners, governors, and those who are leading efforts like Carolyn Tish Blodgett, who has guided the investments for her family's investment company, where they have participated, where they own part of the New York Football Giants, but also Gotham Football Club. Gail Benson, who is the owner and chairwoman of the New Orleans Saints, as well as the New Orleans Pelicans within the NBA. Sheila Ford Hamp, owner of the Detroit Lions. Joan B. Kroc, she was one of the first owners of San Diego Padres in the Major League Baseball. And Laura Ricketts, who is an owner of the Chicago Cubs, Major League Baseball, as well as the Chicago Red Stars Football Club, National Women's Soccer League. Carly Walton Penner, co-owner of the Denver Broncos. Clara Wusai, who is the governor and co-owner of the New York Liberty, the WNBA, as well as the New Jersey Nets, as well as the San Diego Seals and Barclays Center. And again, building on her educational and industry experience in finance, she was able to help inform and help to bring to enhancement and growth these organizations while still remaining committed to one of her passions, social justice. We see Miriam Adelson, who is majority owner in the Dallas Mavericks of the NBA, and Walton Cronkite, who is the owner of the Denver Nuggets, as well as the Colorado Avalanche. Samantha Holloway, co-owner of the Seattle Kraken, and she too brought her expertise from a tech background, co-founder and partner in an investment firm, bringing this expertise and experience to her ownership. We have Suzanne Abair, who is co-owner and CEO of the Atlanta Dream of the WNBA, bringing her experience. Carolyn Kendall, who is majority owner and CEO of the St. Louis City MLS team. She's the first female CEO of a Major League Soccer club in that area. And as we transition in my final few minutes to the C-suite, very similarly, you will see these themes of executive leadership galvanizing one's personal journey and experience to inform the various contexts, the various business opportunities where they led. I included, while not an executive, Maria Teresa de Felipe, who was the first woman to race in Formula One, making her competitive debut in 1948, because history and context is important. Because if we don't recognize the journey, then we can't capture it, we can't honor it, and we can't ensure that others will have these opportunities moving forward. We have members of Monisha Kaltenborn, who was the first female team principal and CEO in Formula One. We have Claire Williams, who was the former deputy team principal for Williams Racing in Formula One. Emily Fraser, who is the chief commercial officer for all of Formula One and president and CEO of the Las Vegas Grand Prix. And she began her career in sports marketing at IMG, and then she took on elevated roles in F1. We have Sylvia Bella, who is the vice president of sporting and race operations with Las Vegas Grand Prix. And what we began to see, and she was the first FIA, which is the governing body for F1, female steward. And what we began to see is that many of these women are not solo, which is vitally important to curating and ensuring an inclusive and welcoming culture and environment. And so it's important to recognize that these organizations are not doing mere lip service or oftentimes keeping women or leaders who are highly valued, highly talented, but isolated. Amelie Conant, who is the head of strategy and brand diversification. As we think about esports, we see growing numbers of women leading in this space as well. Chief Operating Officer Sabrina Wraith for G2 Esports. We have Emily Castengui, who is the Assistant General Manager of the Vancouver Canucks in the NHL. And she, again, her early executive leadership was through a hockey agency. She was the Director of Legal Services and Hockey Operations. We, again, President and CEO, Lori Bajuric of National Esports Association. Johanna Ferries, who is the President of Blizzard Entertainment, which is a very monumental organization as we think about esports. And she is the commissioner of Call of Duty League, which is, again, one of the highest earning areas of esport. Sherry Ballard, who is the CEO of the Minnesota United Football Club in the MLS. Sarah Daggett, EVP and Chief Legal Officer and Head of Public Affairs for Minnesota United Football Club. Gretchen Korf, who also works for the Minnesota United Football Club, again, as we see in major C-suite roles. Jill Gregory is the president of Andretti Global and the COO of TWG Motorsports. And as president, she parlayed her award-winning sports marketing career to really grow and become the executive vice president and general manager at Sonoma Raceway, and really leading as a content officer at NASCAR as a whole. We have the former MLS president and chief administrative and strategy officer of all the league, Joanne Neal. Allison Feaster, who works as part of the VP team for the Boston Celtics. Molly Marcoux-Simon, who was the former commissioner of the LPGA, Jessica Berman, who is the current commissioner of the National Women's Soccer League, Allie Wagner, who is co-founder, co-chair, and alternative governor for Bay Football Club, who was founded by a group, again, a core group of women. Cindy Parlow-Cone, who is the president of U.S. Soccer Federation. And again, leveraging not only her experience as a player, but her experience within industry and business. We have Fatma Samora, who was the first ever woman in African, former Secretary General of FIFA. Sarah Jones Simmer, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the National Women's Soccer League. Sophie Goldschmidt, President and CEO of the U.S. Ski and Snowboard. Cynthia Marshall was the former CEO of the Dallas Mavericks of the NBA. She was the first Black woman to hold such a role. Sandra Douglas Morgan, who is the president of Las Vegas Raiders NFL. She is the first Black and Asian woman to hold the role of NFL team president. Amy Trask, who's the former CEO of the Los Angeles Raiders. She had an extended 30-year tenure. And Christy Coleman, president of the Carolina Panthers of the NFL. Rennie Anderson, executive VP and chief revenue officer of the NFL. Catherine Raishi, assistant GM and vice president of football operations of the Cleveland Browns. Dawn Staley, and I threw her in because she's my favorite NC2A coach, hence where I started with Pat Summitt. Of course, the icon, Billie Jean King, who is the founder of World Team Tennis, again, making opportunities maintained beyond her very illustrious career. Jillian Zucker, who's the president of business operations for the LA Clippers and the NBA. Laura Price, chief operating officer of the Philadelphia 76ers. Katie Griggs, president and business operations for the Baltimore Orioles. And again, leveraging myriad aspects of her career to do so. Sarah Goodrin, Houston Astros director of player development. Martina Kolokotronis, chief operating officer of the Sacramento Kings in the NBA. Shonda Loudermilk, VP of baseball operations of Tampa Bay Rays, Major League Baseball. Kia Clark, the CEO of the New York Liberty and the WNBA. Christy Coleman, president of the Carolina Panthers. Gretchen Shear, president of business operations for the Houston Rockets and NBA. Kathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the Women's National Basketball Association. She was the first woman to function in this role, and she was also the first CEO of Deloitte. Kim Ng, who is a powerhouse, who is the commissioner of Athletes Unlimited Softball League and the first female general manager in Major League Baseball history, serving with the Miami Marlins from 2021 to 2023. Andrea Hirsch, who's the COO and chief legal officer of the USTA. Nikki Fargas, who is the president and general manager of the Las Vegas Aces of the WNBA. Jess Smith, president of the Golden State Valkyries in the WNBA. Morgan Shaw Parker, who is president and COO of the Atlanta Dream. Alicia Valavanes, who is CEO and team president of the Seattle Storm of the WNBA. Stacey Johns, who is president of the Los Angeles Sparks of the WNBA. She began with the Los Angeles Football Club. She had a very short stint at the Bay Football Club and was poached away by the Los Angeles Sparks. Stacey Allister, who is the former U.S. Open Tournament and director of the USTA and chairwoman and CEO of the WTA. Susie Whaley, who was the first female national president of the PGA. Vanessa Vogler, who is the chief administrative officer of the PGA. Valerie Camillo, who is chairperson of the World Tennis Association. Portia Archer, who is the former CEO of the World Tennis Association. Courtney McBride, chief legal officer of the World Tennis Association. Melissa Proctor, EVP and chief marketing officer of the Atlanta Hawks. Marcy Withington is the chief financial officer of the World Tennis Association. Marina Storti, who is CEO of the World Tennis Association Ventures. Lisa Fernandez, General Manager of the Utah Talons, AUSL, the Talons, AUSL. Kat Osterman, General Manager of the Texas Volts of the AUSL. Jenny Dalton Hill, General Manager of the Chicago Bandits of the AUSL. Dana Sorensen, General Manager of the Carolina Blaze of the AUSL, the Softball League. And then we have Lisa France Kennedy, Executive Vice Chair and former Chief Executive Officer of the International Speedway Corporation with NASCAR. We have Amanda Oliver, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for NASCAR. We have Latasha Causey, who is the President of the Phoenix Raceway with NASCAR. And we have Nicole Haves, who is the Vice President and Chief of Staff of NASCAR. And so as I conclude this presentation and remind you of all of these major league sporting opportunities, we must not only look to effective leadership across the board, but honor not only the legacy and the history, but the presence and the future of outstanding leaders who are women and who bring a wealth not only of personal, academic, but professional experience to ensure the best business outcomes. Thank you so much.